David's always making it last comfortable. So.
Okay. I'll speak loud and then they'll hear. Kia ora koutou, good evening everybody. So our LTPA discussion tonight is taking us from the hearings and looking ahead to deliberations. So we've got 4 things to cover tonight. First, an outline of what you will receive in the deliberations reports. We'd like to share some initial analysis of the submission responses that we are working through. To confirm with you additional information that we as officers are providing you for deliberations, and then a recap of the timeline from here to adoption. So to start with the deliberations reports, with the agenda we will have 3 reports basically, or 3 sections. First is a summary report. This summarises all of the consultation and engagement events, how many there were, what types they were, the attendance. It also captures the flavour of our feedback, our unofficial responses that we've got through social media, and it includes the summary of the analysis of the formal submissions. Then there are the key decision reports. These are on each of the key consultation items. So the rates review, live-in landfill, key water infrastructure and the leak detectors, water meters, Foxton Beach freeholding account, and a financial matters report which will capture development contributions, fees and charges, any updates to figures from when we presented material to you for adoption to go out for consultation to now, and the rates increase topic. The third lot are the activities reports. So like you had for hearings, the officer responses to non-consultation items or to additional points, these will summarise and respond to submitter comments on issues not consulted on and do it by topic rather than a response to every single submitter. So that's what you'll receive there.
So in practice, for example, things that were raised around rates, which include like remission policy changes, stuff that's not potentially not within our decision-making ability because we haven't consulted on that, how are we going to deal with that?
Good question. So the intention is, and I'll talk about a little bit of that tonight, but is to include that in the paper so that the submission response will say, and here is a link to the, or here's where you can go to look at the report, and then it would cover those topics in the deliberations paper so that it's visible to everybody.
Okay.
Well, that's a good point that we'd, before deliberations, we'll also publicise this as well so that submitters can go to the decision reports for the key consultation items or for matters that they raised in particular for their groups. They can go to the activities reports and have a look at that as well. All right. We'll move into, we're going to work through issue by issue, giving you an overview, quick summary of what we've found so far with analysis of the submission responses, further work that we will be doing and what we are intending to provide you, and then to check whether there's anything else for that topic that you would like ahead of deliberations. Okay. So on the rates review, we had 332 people respond in their submissions on this. Most of the responses were in support of option 1, keeping the rates system or rates model as it is. 74 were in support of moving to capital value, and 23 in favour of moving to capital value differential. There was quite a clear distinction between rural and urban submitters, and you'll see that in the table on the right, split between options 1, 2 and 3. Now we'll be doing, I've since broken it down by location, so we'll be providing you the graphs of by where people are in the district for each of the options, as well as the overall responses. And on this, we'll move us over to Jacinta.
Thanks. So, pardon me. As part of this conversation today, the hope is that I'll give you some guidance in terms of some of the things that we heard through the consultation and hearings, some questions that have come up. I've sought some legal advice on that and received that today in terms of guidance, so we'll go through that. And then as part of this as well, there's about 4 slides. It would be good to get your thoughts on. There's a slide at the end that talks about analysis or information to include in the deliberations report, and that's to make sure that any thinking or information that you want to have re-summarized to you or included in that deliberations report, to make sure that you can make a full decision based on all the information you need to have, that we talk about that today, just so that there's some time to work through it. So as part of the hearings process, there were definitely some conversations, both at the community meetings and also through the hearings, where those people that were significantly impacted, where they may have had a high value property but were on fixed incomes and were looking for options either to stick with option 1 or to look at some form of a remission option. So what I brought together, and also rates postponement, for example, and rates remission. So rates remissions for low-income homeowners, rates postponement, and also part of the process is there were some comments around the rates remission for second dwellings. So in some cases where there's a few instances where that came through, where if you effectively have 2 dwellings on a property, you're charged 2 lots of fixed charges for everything. So some conversations that we've had both through the hearings process, but also in general through the work that we do, is that there are some households out there where they may have built that second dwelling for a family member that's not well or is having affordability issues. So some councils look at a remission to offer that if you sign a declaration, for example, you may be eligible to not pay the second lot of fixed charges if you're not receiving any income for it and it's for a particular family purpose. So that's an option that you could consider. And I know we talked about it through the earlier on in the process, that there are options that you could do for rates remission for low-income homeowners, and those are things like if rates are more than X percent of your household income and your family income is X number of dollars or less, then you could apply for a remission. There are a number of councils that do that. I think what I heard at the table before we went to consultation is that the request was to wait for the long-term plan for that rates remission, but I thought because of the feedback that we've heard, regardless of the option that you may vote on during deliberations, it's worth having that conversation again about, is there an option for us to do any of those things now, and also the option of rates postponement. So the guidance that we've received from legal on that is it still requires a consultative process. So if, for example, you chose as a table to want me to progress this through a consultation process, then the council could go out for consultation in the next month, and then have a consultation process for a month, and then have the rates remission policy in place during that next financial year. So it would mean a separate consultative procedure, but it is possible if that's something that you wanted to achieve. So just to...
So, in the order of things, making the decision on the previous slide then could determine what else on this?
It could do, or it could be both. Yes. So you would have, regardless of the option that you chose, you could
Yeah.
still do this.
Just hypothetical, the preferred option, there was a response around a rates remission for retirement villages. I think that was proffered, based on their fixed charge that they couldn't change. But then obviously incorporating that into a rates remission consultation process would determine, well, it's determined by what the previous decision is, because you wouldn't have the necessarily, the impact is different if you went the other way. So it's not necessary. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, in that particular instance, I definitely see what you mean. And it's important to note in regards to remissions as well, we would effectively need to rate others more. So if, for example, you were to provide $200,000 worth of rates remissions so that people could apply up to a level of 200,000, I've just made that up. But then you would effectively need to build in an additional $200,000 of rates that you're charging others, to allow that to be a net nil position, or you would need to increase the level of rates
So
beyond the 7.9.
the annual plan amount is 340,000, but what then with the revaluations for Tarika? How much is that going to consume potentially of that amount?
It's a good question, and we're not sure yet. So what we will do as part of the rate setting process is we'll assume a level of, once we know from quotable value what the Tarika revised remission, the revised values are, is we'll assume a level of reduction in rate in that land value or capital value, so that that's taken into account to a level when we set the rates, so that it doesn't go beyond that remission level. I think in terms of the question around the remissions and the level of budget we've got, if we were looking at these types of remissions, you would definitely need to apply extra, because we do get pretty close to that budgeted level in terms of remissions.
So, sorry, can I just unpack that? So, how much do we ordinarily use in terms of that remissions budget annually? And then I've got two follow-up questions.
It's probably give or take about 20,000 in terms of where it gets to.
It's not major. Because I was under the impression that the situation with Tarika was that we go and get a special valuation. And doesn't that mean that the impact, they're not really getting discounted rates, they're just getting a special valuation? So doesn't that mean that it affects everyone else's portion? So, or do we actually grant them a dollar figure remission? Is that?
Normally, for all those types of remissions, you don't necessarily know upfront who's going to apply for a remission, because you're normally to be, like for Roslyn Road, for example, people need to come and apply, and so they'll have a value as part of a normal process, and then they apply. But in this case, we'll have an idea ahead of time, and so we'll be able to plan for that reduced value.
Did we get confirmation from legal around the revaluations phasing model?
Yes, we did, and that's the next one there. So some of the other options I think that were talked about were around capping, and phasing the impact of the capital value change. There are definitely some comments about can it be staggered, or are there some other things that could happen in that space. Another question was around other differentials for the current land value based general rate. That's those types of ones. You can't necessarily cap the valuation change because that's required, but you can cap, for example, you can't cap the valuation change. The conversation though around can you cap it, for example, if you were to go forward with the option 2, can you phase that or cap that process? In terms of that opinion, and I've put some detail here just to help with the conversation, but effectively no, you can't cap it. You can have a remission process whereby you allow people to be able to apply for a remission to help offset the impact of that. When Auckland did their amalgamation a number of years ago, they were able to do a capping process as part of their rates review and amalgamation as part of bringing all the councils into one in terms of the impacts of going from the number of rating systems there were into one. But in that case, they had some special legislation that allowed that to occur. So in terms of the Local Government Rating Act as it stands, we don't have the ability to cap the level of increases due to a proposed change. So the way that you can influence that is through either through a remission or through some form of differential. So, for example, in the change that we have in terms of our proposal, there's option 2 and option 3. So option 3 is effectively not going the full way to capital value, but is going 80% of the way there. So that is one form of capping or phasing in the increase. So,
So stick to that.
yeah, so if you wanted to do something on that line, it would be either through a remission or through that differential process. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions on that one before?
Yeah, so just to clarify on that, would we be able to set the general rate based on 50% LV and a 50% differential of CV? You know, could we do a gradual transition through that manner, or is the general rate, one line, can't be set on two different things?
It could be set on two different things, but in that case, it would very, very likely need to go through a consultation again. But you could absolutely say that and go, let's split the general rate in half. We want half of it to be based on capital value, half to be based on land value, with whichever differentials you chose, but you just have to consult separately again. Yeah. So absolutely, if the table, for example, decided, let's go with option 1, let's stay with the status quo, then during the next long-term plan, there could be a conversation about topics like that. So this is quite a bit of detail probably around the remissions that I've already explained to you, but I just wanted, we'll have the slides for you in your portal, but I just thought it was useful to include the specific words so that you can read through it in your own time as well. So again, the key point there is rates remission is likely unsuitable for mitigating the impact of a rates review across large sections of the community. So for example, if we said, if your rates have been impacted by more than 10%, you're eligible to apply for a remission, then that probably is going to become quite problematic administratively. It's something that technically could happen, but it's more for specific outliers that you might want to address rather than a big chunk of the change. Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, just me. My question's probably more around how do we show transparency around when we do some of these. Obviously, we've got these properties out here that are quite significantly impacted, but do we need to be transparent with the community around that, or do we just do it on a case-by-case basis to address that in the short term until we can probably get into it? You know, when that place does, the development goes through. Does that make sense or no?
Kind of that idea of Devon of how do we choose and how do we make sure that we've got good logic and the community knows that we're applying a postponement to a particular sector of the community.
Yeah.
I think you're right. For example, in the instance of Tarika, and I'll be the first to say we didn't do our best job in that space. We should have gone out to them early, straight at the start, and offered that remission. We did that at the end. I mean, normally with a remission policy, we say, look, if you're going to apply, you need to apply for it. We're not going to go out there and promote it necessarily. But with the Tarika one, for example, knowing that in hindsight what we should have done in that instance is to say, look, everybody will go and organise that and sort it out on your behalf. But if, for example, you really wanted to make sure that everybody that was impacted by 30% or more was eligible for remission, then through the deliberations process, we could make it really clear how many of them there are, where are they, and potentially communicate with them up front rather than having them apply. So those things we could do.
Like, I don't think we need to go to that detail, but sorry, but what I was worried about was we probably had 5 or 6 people that were significantly impacted, and probably the stress levels and that sort of, and obviously those sort of bad stories get out, and that's probably what sort of brings the whole side down. But it's then how do we address them going forward so we're not in that position again, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for those significant ones where if you were to go forward with option 2, for example, and in option 1 there will still be those people too, is looking at options that link to household income and rates as a share of household income are a good sort of way to measure the level of struggle that those households are experiencing and where they might need some help. Because when we heard from them, a lot of them was what I heard was that they were linking to their fixed income and the fact that they now were struggling to pay rates.
Just on that one though, like I struggle to get my head around some of that stuff. In that, how do you go through everybody's income and actually prove that they're legit? And like, then you go to the rural sector and you can say, oh, so this farm might make no money, this farm might be doing really well. So a percentage of the income could be a bad year, like how do you then quantify that? And that's the difficulty, I suppose, from what I say,
And it's, you rely on, you've got to just rely on what people say as well in terms of a lot of instances where it's more residential based, is you do have the rates rebate application process that helps because you're already going through that process with them to look at their income and the supporting information and submitting that to the DAA. And so you've kind of done a lot of that work already for some families. Rates postponement as well, so that kind of that links in with the remission policy. That's absolutely an option for us, and that can be done. And it's just a question of whether you do still want to investigate it. If you do you want to do it now, or do you want to wait for the long-term plan to go through that process?
Can I just ask on this one? So, irrespective of which option gets supported by this table around rates, there are going to be people in the community that potentially receive what I'll call unexpected shocks. And so, because I think some of the people that have got the letter may have looked at the number, they're assuming, yes, I'm all good with that. But if, for example, option 1, then that's going to swap around. And so, the need for tools sooner rather than later, whether it's remission or postponement, to me sounds like it's something that we need to focus on. But postponement obviously has an impact on debt ceiling and borrowing, all that kind of thing. One of the things that I'm not sure, you had a postponement policy at Kapiti, but there was limited uptake, and so that's, I guess, the thing that around this that is the missing piece of information for me is just like how much of what are the experiences around the country in terms of uptake on this, and what's the flow-on impact for debt? Because if 50% of our population decided to try and take it up, or like a large number, it's going to have a massive impact. And so, like getting the policy settings, whether it's older ratepayers or low-income households, for example, like it seems to me that it's not this or something else. This is sort of like it's part of a range of tools that we need to have potentially.
In terms of the exact numbers, I'm not. I can ask on one of those. We have a council listserv. There isn't often a lot of uptake of the policy. The reasons why I know nationally, the local government funding agency has been working to look at a national rates postponement scheme so that effectively it can be administered with the help of LGFA centrally rather than through councils doing it. So there's been some pilot work happening with it. It's not across the line yet, but that will, in terms of impact on debt, that will be an assistance going forward. But I think still it does provide a good tool for those that are struggling and have that it's an opportunity for them for something to help them. There's definitely, I haven't heard of any councils that have a significantly high level of uptake of it, but it may still be a matter of time before that starts to feed in a lot more. I've heard that some, families aren't fond of this process, of the rates. Some families might not be fans of the rates postponement process. In terms of safeguards, so we have safeguards in terms of on the rates or on the property, but also if that value started to increase significantly, then there are also options of putting a land charge on the property to make sure that at the point where the family member passes on and the land and the property sells, that the council is able to recover its property or recover its rates sooner. Yeah.
I have an experience in Central Hawke's Bay where we introduced a rates remission policy. We set aside 300k, and this was during COVID time. And at the time of leaving, we'd not spent $1. So it's that, and we promoted it, but it's that. I suppose there was other government support at the time, but it just wasn't a mechanism that people used for some reason.
It'd be interesting just to kind of get a rough, based on the remissions conversation that we've had, do you think in the room there's an appetite that you may wish through the deliberations paper for that to be progressed as part of informing or being available during the 23-24 financial year?
Jonathan, you're on.
Well, I had a question before you asked that question.
Oh, sorry.
So no matter what tools we try and implement, we have to go out and consult. And how long would that consultation process take?
Probably 2.5 months.
All up, yes, have to be open for 4 weeks.
It doesn't stop us though, we still strive for rates carrying on.
No, so we could absolutely still do the whole process. We would need to, through the process, signal that it was coming. And so 4 weeks consultation. I allowed 2.5 months on, just so there's some time on either side for decision making and discussion reporting.
So just to follow up, so even if we waited for the next major rates review, we're just in how many years away?
Hopefully 10.
10? So we're going to have to do this at some stage anyway, aren't we? Explore these tools, we have these mechanisms in the future anyway.
Yes, it's just a matter of whether we do it this year or do it next year. So I would say my sense would be that they would be explored as part of the next LTP, definitely. It's what I've heard from a number of you through, but that may change. But yeah, it's just about whether this year you think it's worthwhile to make because there isn't, in terms of our current tools for assistance, we don't have any specific ones to address some of the ones you may have heard through the process.
So, Jacinta, we've heard of 2 councils already tonight, Central Hawke's Bay Company, where I think one was postponement, one was remission, that were very low uptake. Do we have any insight around anywhere else in the country where these have been put in and had a different result in terms of there has been a lot of uptake?
I'll check on the rates postponement. In terms of remissions, the remissions policy south of us at Kapiti was highly used in terms of people applying. There was financial hardship when water meters were introduced for families that had more than 5 people in the household and may have been experienced trouble. there were definitely quite a few that was used. Wellington City, I know their remission policy, their remissions are, in terms of financial hardship, are used quite a bit as well. But in terms of the deliberations paper, I will check in on rates postponement if I can, the hardship as well.
I just wanted to add that we need to compare ourselves with councils like us. I don't think companies like us at all. They don't have a rural sector at all, company. And to compare ourselves to a council that has similar rural urban demographic.
Is there a specific council you prefer?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Leave it up to management.
Yeah, I mean, what I can do is we can ask Manawatu, for example, or some of our northern ones. Absolutely. Yeah. Apologies if I haven't mentioned Kapiti. It's just first-hand experience in terms of the policy. So the other option, just to talk through, is can we introduce additional options? Because I know that's been something that's been discussed through the process. The general gist is we do have some flexibility. However, in the principles in terms of Section 82, people who are invited or encouraged to present their views to the local authority should be given clear information by the local authority concerning the purpose of the consultation and the scope of the decisions to be taken following the consideration of views presented. So, if the council decides on a rating policy that largely accords with the options consulted on, but with a modified differential, then so long as this is in response to the feedback received from the community and it achieves the wider objectives, then it looks like it would be okay. But if you were to look at introducing significantly different options, for example, splitting the general rate into half capital value, half land value, then we'd easily be challenged on a decision like that. Okay, so in terms of what I wanted to test with you today was, in terms of some of the analysis that we're planning to bring back as part of the deliberations paper, was an analysis of the impacts for residential residents receiving rates rebates. I'd heard during the process, I particularly submitted that said there's been no view in terms of those people that are receiving rates rebates and those that are either better off or worse off, the different scenarios. So I'll provide that so that's clear for everybody. Analysis of residential properties by town. We showed some graphs during the process in terms of the impacts of how many people were impacted by how much. So my intention would be through it is for option 1, 2, and 3 is just to again show that information so that it's clear for everybody. And in that, just that it's important to show how many people will be negatively impacted if option 1 or option 3 is chosen instead of the preferred option.
That'll be actual numbers rather than percentage basis?
Yep, so it'll be the number of people and the dollars. It can also be the number of people, the number of households and the percentage. So we can do both if that's useful.
It's probably going to be a pain, but is it worthwhile showing multi-land, considering a large portion of our district is multi-land?
Good question, and I've got I haven't put it on there, but I did get the team to pull the multi-land today. And so yes, that will be included in there as well. Absolutely, that's fine. I forgot to put it on the slide, but it is coming. Yeah.
And just for point of clarity too, because that was a presentation Tamira Hyde was going to make, but he decided to pull from the presentation and work directly with Jacinda around those matters of Māori freehold land and Māori land.
Yeah, so he's been provided with that analysis. Absolutely. So the overall Māori freehold land picture will be included. But I think it's important to note in that area, I think we'll do some work to make sure that it's clear for everybody how that works, the land, because I noticed through working through that particular one is there isn't necessarily that clarity on what does Māori freehold land mean, and how can the way that it's being used change the way that it's rated. So, for example, marae, urupa, if it's not farmed, then it's non-rateable. But if you choose then to lease that land out to others for use, then it starts to become rateable. So those types of things is just making sure that that's clear for everybody. As well, one thing that I noticed through the rural community came up quite strongly through the process is the analysis showing how much of the general rate is paid by residential, rural, each of the different sectors, both from a dollar and a percentage perspective, currently and with the different proposals. So I'll include.
Could you do that?
Capita or well, per capita would be better. You're not going to be able to do per capita. You know, a breakdown that reflects the number of people paying that is kind of.
It's so I know there was the 600 farming families, but it's also quite difficult to tell how many residential ratepayers there are to give an equal comparison. So we could do it from a rural perspective, but it's more difficult to try and tell from a residential perspective how many properties are in common ownership.
I don't know. Just some kind of how many households, how many rating units are paying that figure would be a nice way to break it down on a per rating unit cost.
Yep, we can definitely do that. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, what about land size? You know, and even residential size is under 1,000, say, or 1,000 square metres, anything, you know. Then you've got the 2 acres, and then you've got the 10 acres, and then you've got the farms. There must be some sort of, I know, I'm trying
And that's okay. I guess what I'd ask is,
why?
because we're not rating based on land size, then why would and I can give you the property numbers, I can give you the land value, the capital value, and the amount paid.
Yeah.
If there is a need in terms of land size, but I would just ask on what basis that would be useful.
I think
I understand Rogan's question is, you know, how much of our population is paying how much of the rates? And that was exactly what the rural community was saying, is that they're a very small population paying a large portion of rates.
And I hear what you're saying. All my question is that I can give you the rural side of it, but I can't give you the residential side of it because I don't know that from the stats, that's all. So it's 600 families and 1,951 properties in the rural sector. I can give you that, but I can't give you.
Yeah.
I can give you the total population, 18,000 units,
Yeah.
but I can't give you the number of people. That's all.
That's cool. Well, what you can give.
When you say rural sector, that doesn't include livestock, does it?
Sorry, rural farming is what I should have said there. Yeah. Yeah.
Jacinta, one other thing that a number of submitters raised was that if they're not connected to water services, they're providing all those services themselves and the associated costs with that. And I'm not certain whether those are significant annual costs, although I'm aware that there are some annual costs associated with that. But whether there is any figure out there that maybe through Three Waters sort of reforms or something that we could take into account when considering a household income. Because basically their point was, well, we provide all these services ourselves, yet you're taking our raw income and not including other costs that other people you're already taking into account in an urban dweller's income because they pay rates. I don't know whether it's significant or not, but like if you're emptying a septic tank and you're having to truck in water and stuff like that, maybe that does mount up. I don't know.
Living rurally, it does. I know.
Yeah.
In terms of, definitely, it does in terms of regional council costs as well, in terms of access to bores, all that kind of thing. But I guess what I was going to try and do is, in terms of that map, is take the waters out and show the picture without.
Okay.
So that's the intention. The analysis list is fairly large, and there's about 3 days between when the paper needs to get finished for you. But it should be okay. That's the intention. I think that's
comparing.
No, I hear what you're saying.
And even if we don't get it completed for our internal deadline, it might be we release the report and that map's not in there, but we're able to provide it to you before the meeting. So it's just, like we're obviously working on really hard deadlines, but
I think it would help. I'm absolutely happy. Yeah, I think it would help the process. Yeah. because there was absolutely no intention for that to be to sway things in a certain way, but after hearing the feedback, I understood the perspective with which it was said, and so yeah, it would be absolutely fair to show that in that way. Yeah. The other bit is analysis of submissions by location. So that was around what Cara mentioned, just in terms of where we have had feedback in a particular area, positive or negative. It's just helpful to understand how many are impacted by how much, either positively or negatively in that area, relative to how many have submitted. So that's another bit. And then the officer responses to submitters on specific.
Sorry, that one shouldn't actually sit in that because it all is quite on topic, the comments. So apologies for that. All right. Okay. So we're happy to move on to the feedback that we received on the rates increase itself. So we received 279 total responses, 178 in favour of option 2, the smaller rates increase. 139 did not answer. And going through this, I'm going to do some further analysis because that group who haven't responded would like to look into it and just check whether their answer on the rates review question is actually meant to cover the rates increase as well. It seems particularly large, but this is what the first cut of figures show us. So yes, some variance between options 1 or 2. And again here we'll do the breakdown across the district by location, and we've done the first look at the rural and urban. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just waiting for the next slide, sorry.
The next one? Great.
Okay, so in looking at option 2, where people indicated what further reductions they would support being looked at, there was a range of feedback. Yes. So we can do some more analysis on this as well. We're going to compare the level of support for the rates review proposal with the rates increase proposal, as mentioned about whether there was one response for 2 questions. Just going through it, there were a number where there was, say, support for looking at 3 out of 4 parks. Curious as to whether people supported their own area as well. Yeah, we're human, so that information will come as well. Great.
Just as part of it, in terms of no surprises approach, as part of sort of, we've prepared the budget, things go on in the business, and we start to look at things that are going to affect us or potentially affect us in the next financial year. What we wanted to do was raise those with you now. We're not proposing to go out through this deliberations paper and ask for more money. We're looking to resolve those as we can. But I wanted to signal, in terms of interest rates, for example, we had an assumption in the budget at the time from our advisors at Bancorp. The interest rate sat at around 3.75. That's now for the next financial year, and it's going to start coming down in year 2 onwards, but going as high as 4.26%. So that potentially, if we took that, would mean another $760,000 in terms of rates. So we're continuing to work on that in terms of the capital program. How can things change? The conversation we just had about property. But just wanted to signal to you that that was something that's being worked on. As well around utilities costs. So we're currently beginning a review in that space. We've assumed some good, in terms of the budget, we expect some impacts when we come to you for the long-term plan. We'll expect to see some impacts coming through, we've allowed for a reasonable amount for next year, so we're doing okay for next year. But the indication is that we've guessed about right for next year, but the ongoing years might need some work. So just to flag that, this will be one of your favorites. I think my response when I heard heard it on the phone was "Whoa," which is normally what you would say to an audit director, but.
What my response
That's where I think we should use Sam's envelope, tell them how much we're prepared to spend, and they can do the audit up to that, no more.
Clint, you've got 200k.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this was an initial fee that they've put to their moderations committee, just in full transparency for you guys. I don't think it will come in at this high. They'll moderate us against councils and regional councils across the country. But that is a scary first number to be given in the first instance anyway. As well, in terms of our valuation contract with Quotable Value, we're going through a procurement review process at the moment. And indications are that there could be a shortfall of up to 70,000. Some things that we're doing with them are, between Blair and myself, for example, we're trying to look at getting them access to our building consent information directly online so that they can grab the information quickly and be able to use it in the field rather than relying on information and needing to go and visit. So if that's the case, we're looking for some savings to compensate for the fact that we'll be making things more efficient. So hopefully that will come along well. In the insurance space, you will see coming forward through the risk and assurance agenda will be the insurance strategy. So Rob's doing a great job looking at our overall insurance program, looking at what we insure, looking at our deductibles, looking at our loss profile, and just assessing whether we've got the right mix of insurance and deductibles for the council. The aim is that we're working towards a $200,000 saving in that space, but conversations are yet to come to the table around that. And as well, roading and grounds maintenance, just signalling, I know that you've had the conversations already, but that we're likely to face budget pressure for, not for next year necessarily, but for the following year. So just before we go into the landfill, based on what you've heard today, does that about sound okay in terms of information that, so Māori Freehold land and the maps definitely will be added onto this conversation, but in terms of bringing options for the remissions for you to decide on and around that analysis, does that fit the picture in terms of what you might want to see?
Just before we go into the landfill, can we just test that around rates as well? Like, is there additional options or advice that you're wanting?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, on the strong weighting of submissions to a rates increase less than 7.9%, if there were any additional cost savings or options or things, what else could be cut list.
Yeah, and any kind of guidance around the table on particular levels of service or areas that you'd like us to explore?
Professional services and other expenses.
Specific to what areas? All?
Broadly contracted services, contracted professional services. That budget line alone could have some savings in it.
Given the pressure around interest rates, and the obviously when you debate on three waters, you've got those three options around kind of loosely high, medium, low. A council wanting to see any other, I'm not speaking to three waters, but and obviously we're a little bit constrained because of the scope of the LTP. was on Three Waters. We didn't go into the other activities, but where we don't think it triggers the level of significance, the councillors wanting to see maybe some options around pulling back on our capital program outside of Three Waters in order to soften some of that impact on our balance sheet. It's not going to have a direct impact on rates, but it could impact the balance sheet.
So for this year, we had the capital program of 55, but planning to only spend 35. So that's what we rated for. Have we adopted that same approach for this coming year?
Yes, although it's 42.
Yeah, last year started about 46. It went out to around 56 with additional changes, and the cap was 35. This year's targeting around 46 with carryovers in terms of total, and then Jacinda, you've said the target though is 42. Yeah.
And is that because of some of those carryovers that we just talked about around Taraika particularly? Yeah. So it's sort of like 35 plus Taraika. Is that kind of the... Yeah.
We're currently sitting at 26 in terms of a program at the end of April, just to give you a guide.
Is there any significant or tangible savings if we do go down the path of reviewing the services our community hubs provide in terms of 7-day opening and current opening of hours, as to whether there can be some significant changes that might drive a reasonable rates decrease?
Yeah, the only thing I'd flag is that obviously council ruled that out as one of the options we put in the consultation document, and kind of when we think about level of service and think about talking to our community, it's probably one of those things we would have talked to the community about. And so if council want to capture it in, but would need to go away and, like, if it was an hour here or an hour there, Clint, then like we can achieve that. But if we're talking, let's say, closing on a Sunday at Te Takere and Te Awaho, then that's probably something we should have flagged to the community. And remember, at the time we kind of gave you the advice that when you it doesn't actually have that much of an impact.
Yeah, because that was what I was going to say, is that for me, one of the areas that needs some further examination is in that community facilities space. And Brent, you and I haven't had an opportunity to have a conversation yet around, for me, that the magic is in that cost per visit type number, because at the moment we report on how many numbers of people are going through these facilities, and that number's dropping, but the operational cost is increasing. And so it means that for every single visit, we're talking, and we haven't got the precise number, so I won't say it, but it's becoming, and so that means that more and more subsidisation is happening through the targeted rates, and so those costs are just going up. So for me, that's something that I don't think you can probably put options as part of this thing, but it certainly needs to be our focus of the long-term plan proper. Yeah.
Potential cost savings. So there are different lines for footpaths than there are for shared pathways, and in the CapEx program for the annual plan, we've got $1 million for shared pathways, and then 298,000 under OPEX. So we could trim one or the other. Probably the OPEX was where I'd suggest to provide that immediate rate relief. Because then under footpaths we propose CapEx 350, and then under OPEX 995,000. Overall, across the long-term plan, when I added up all the lines for these be it a footpath, shared pathway, cycle thing. We're proposing to spend well over $63 million in 20 years on pathways, and that to me is $3 million a year if you just average it out. There's room in that. I kind of feel without having a massive impact immediately on community, because if we're just going to deliver next year $1 million rather than 1.3 million, I mean, they're not really going to feel the effects of that. And then in the LTP proper, I'd like to look at it more closely, because $63 million, and there were other lines, I'm just saying, I was looking at the big numbers, compared to an extra 15 million more for roading. So when you're going to spend 70 odd on roads and then 63 on pathways, I thought, ooh, that seems a bit heavy on one side. I mean, pathways rather than roading. But I mean, that's just out of the full financial version rather than the little green book that the public sees.
The team are doing some analysis, and they'll come back with a conclusive answer around, the potential and the makeup of those OPEX and CAPEX projects, particularly focused on next year. I think the wider question you've made around overall 20-year investment in the what looks like about a 50-year program of work in the current shared path strategy that was sort of adopted and looked at from previous council. So that's probably an LTP proper conversation.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add about, like, I'm not trying to be too thing about it, but footpaths are subsidised, shared pathways are not. Okay, so that's why I'm sort of targeting the shared pathways, because they're not subsidised by a far rate. Yeah. Yeah, and
we've also got the Transport Choices shared path, which is fully funded in the next financial year. So yeah, what I'll do is we'll come back with the line of questions and just give you detail on each of those. But yeah, certainly happy to respond and give that information. Definitely a conversation for long-term plan proper as well in terms of a potential reset around that investment level.
Monique, is that first tranche of Three Waters funding included in this budget? So it's not there, so it's a completely separate piece of work, is it?
It's not included in the draft budgets that have gone out.
Right.
Hopefully, if there's all the information is set up, the team will have it included in the final deliberations papers. That won't make any overall impact in terms of borrowings, though, because there'll be capital funding or operational funding and the expenditure on the other side. But it is still good to have it in there.
So what concerns me, if we've got another $4 million of spend that we want to make over the next 12 months, how much we won't do because of, we've actually got to do those projects. We're committed to those, aren't we? And we have to deliver them. What impact that might have on us being able to deliver the rest of the program that we say we're going to do. And there was $2 million set aside for the Levin Town Centre in that, I would be ecstatic if we spend that $2 million, but I could see us not spending all of it. And I just wondered, what impact that might have as well.
We'll make sure that those considerations are included in the deliberation report.
Okay. Should we move on to the Levin landfill? So what the numbers are showing us at first glance is that the strongest support has come through for option 2, to keep the landfill closed but investigate alternative options for generating income. 70 responses for option 1, keeping it closed, and 77 for reopen. When we look at, you'll get a much prettier table than this one that's easier to read. So what we've done is gone through each of the responses and looked at the rankings that people gave them. So what this shows is that the most first preferences went to, say, native plant nursery and the clean fill, but overall it shows that there was a level of support for investigation of all of these options. Ones that came through were the ones from the hearings about waste to energy generation, a number in support of construction and demolition material processing, noting the potential gap in the market there, and also farming or forestry as an alternative use. So that information will all be presented to you in a nicer way. Is there anything that further that you would like to see ahead of deliberations on the landfill topic?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the table before this pie chart, I'd like break down by location.
Yes.
Location, and ideally, people who have higher interest in the area. There's a number of groups who, realistically have pretty strong opinions on the matter and have been telling us things for a long time that we should really listen to.
We've currently broken down the data so that we can see like the Hokior lens on that versus the Levin lens versus Wairakura-Whenua lens versus those who live out of the district.
And we'll also break down the comments that people attach to there so that you'll see what different groups or organisations their feedback has been as well.
I think it's hard to grasp where they're coming from because when I did my little bit of work, there were 93 addresses that weren't supplied as part of the submission, so we can't even identify where those 93 are casting their vote or their submission from. And the other part for me was, I think in future consultation documents, that there needs to be a component that allows Māori to identify if they want to be identified as Māori in these processes, because that actually helps me understand how iwi and Māori are actually participating or not. And it's not just for council purposes, that's actually for everything, even around elections and things like that. It just arms us with some information about where we need to be engaging our people to get the best participation from them. And the other one too was, you guys would have no way of breaking down who the Māori were in that process, where I went through every single individual submission and identified the Māori that I could recognise, provide some of that data back to you guys. So I'll give that to you. I haven't finished collating it all, but I can certainly break down the Māori voice from everyone else that I've witnessed in those submissions.
Great, that would be great, thank you. That what we have been able to do is where people identified Ngāti Pariraukawa have had significant representation through this, so we'll present that information to you as well.
Yeah, also some reflection of people that have submitted on behalf of groups or numbers of representatives that they were submitted on behalf of. It'd be quite good if we could capture that somehow. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, a submission from an individual versus a submission from 100 people in the Marae is.
From an individual that says that they represent 400 people. So.
Yeah.
Not the Ratepayers Association, so they represent 400 people.
Yep.
I mean, really? You get 15 people turning up to their meeting?
We have this argument every consultation process about the need to ask the question of anybody who's making a group submission, how many people do you represent and what process did you go through to prove this submission? And we didn't really do that through this because it's no one never ever get a straight answer. So
actually, you raised a really good point, Sam, and it's a point that I've been grappling with, is actually there's no process that I saw that validates submissions at all. So Joe Boggs could sit down and write 400 submissions and put every member of his family on it with a different address, and you've got no process to validate that submission. And the reason why I was saying it is, again, the only process you can use is something like an electoral roll that can actually validate a person's address that they're submitting from. But I'm just saying that's how open this process is, and we're basing actually a lot of the submissions on trust.
You'd be able to validate some of that on ratepayers though, wouldn't you?
If they own the property they live in.
Which is great.
That just reminded me, your first comment, Justin, that we promised we would get you a copy of all the submissions without the redactions. So Jenna will just follow up on that, because obviously the copies that you've got have the addresses redacted versus our in the system we have the copies where the addresses are not redacted, which is how the team have been able to analyse the data.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I don't even think it was actually the address, it was actually more the town. It's just, was it Manukau, was it Otaki, was it Foxton, within the street?
Well, the reality is by sharing it with elected members, we're sharing it in committee, so there's nothing, we're managing our privacy obligations.
And on that, we can also share the number who did provide their weather from and the number who didn't. And yeah, generally it's been a smaller number who didn't provide any detail about where they're located. Okay. Then we move on to our key water infrastructure and leak detectors. Water meters.
Sorry, Karen, just on the landfill. The only other thing that I think is important that we include in the paper is some commentary around, if you can go back that slide with those different options, which of these options require the brand new resource consent, and what are the options in terms of variation of the existing resource consent, because that's an important consideration for the decision making process. And I know we haven't had much advice around that, but it needs to be signposted.
So we just this, I missed that question. Sorry. Just highlighting that there is also, post decision around landfill. If the decision is to close, that we will need to come back with a paper quite quickly. We've got about a 2-month window around the term sweetheart deal and the disposal options around Midwest. So there's a little bit of work for officers to do to look at alternates to actually bring an option to the table and the financial consequence around that.
Yeah, so I was just keen for Dan to signal that, just in case there's any elected members that feel like that has to be part of your decision, because our view is that you're making a decision on the future of the landfill, and then whatever the impact of that is, whether that's to open or to close, if it is to open, then obviously we're going to be bringing you back advice on how we do that, and if it's to close, we're going to be bringing you back some advice around how very quickly we make a decision on our contractual, whatever our future contractual partnership looks like with Midwest or not.
Thank you. Moving on to the key water infrastructure. We received 259 responses on this. Option 1, the preferred option, received the most support, 85 responses. Option 2, 68 was second. Option 4, which was the variation of option 2 about reducing the program of work to fit the budget, minus water meters, was third. And then option 3, which was increase the budget to match the program of work needed, minus water meters, came in at fourth. So yes, this kind of shows you how we will be breaking down by location in the district. Looking to provide it like this. There will also be different types of graphs as well, so line graphs to just give you that quick visual for each option, and then we'll compare them like this.
If this table could be grouped by, groups that don't actually pay water rate, I know we can't make assumptions, but a number of those locations don't pay water rates at all. If they could be kind of noted as unlikely to be affected by this policy at all, that'd be quite nice in terms of on the table and by totals.
I don't know if that analysis is reliable though, because there are people, for example, from Manukau, if I recall some submissions, where they were saying, I'm a property owner in Levin, and so I own rental properties or whatever, and so it might not be immediately apparent without understanding their personal circumstances. And because like there was some, for example, there were a couple of Wellington ones, and it turned out that they owned the batch in Hokio, but they put their address as Wellington, so I'm just not sure how accurate that will be.
I don't think it will be particularly accurate, but it will be more indicative. Given the number of rural submissions we got and the percentage of rural ratepayers that don't pay water rates and aren't affected by this change, I think it is worth being aware that approximately 30 or 40% of the answers on this may be from a group that are not affected by this change. They could be affected, but
So could they be all the ones that didn't answer?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
We can look into that, so we can give you the urban-rural split and you see what we can dive into for the ones that didn't answer.
Even like just Rogan, like looking at Waitanere and Ohau, well, they're not affected by water rates right now, but one of the things that's inside the capital program is future articulation to those communities. So, would you rule them in and out?
I can do that analysis of the table myself and I receive it.
You don't want to send it to me once you're done.
Just as a general comment, we're looking to do the urban-rural split and where people are located for each of the options for each of the questions, so we can give you that. Is there any additional information you would like ahead of deliberations on waters issues?
Just probably noting we do have Pity has asked for some information which I think is really valid around, okay, if we put in the water meters, when will we, how cost effective is that, how will we, and we don't necessarily have all the answers to that because we haven't done the detailed business case, but we'll definitely provide some advice to help that decision making.
And is that money that we've set aside for water meters, is that split over 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, there is a spread in the numbers, but I think the important factor is this is effectively getting a mandate to go and investigate. So we know conceptually you can spend $1 million or 6. There'll have to be a business case around which is the most effective option that would then be put back as an option for a council decision. So it's really conceptually we know that water meters would provide a solution. We know the rough water costs. There's further work to do, and that's the piece of work that would come back to a council decision.
It's either over 1 or 2 years. I can't quite remember from the details.
3, isn't it? 3. Sorry. Yes, 4, 5, so 2 million each year for 3 years, starting 2050.
Or 1 million next year, and we do the old manual meters. So there's a range of options, and we'll come back with a council paper on that.
We then move on to development contributions. So we received 259 responses on this. The same number, coincidentally, as responded on the waters, although not one for one. And this is our split. 145 agreed with the proposal, 114 opposed it, and a significant number didn't respond to this question. We'll include the range of comments that have come through. We have noticed that a couple of people have thought that developer contributions meant that we were subsidising developers. So just providing a bit of clarity on that. And the others, to developers, that we were contributing to developers rather than they were contributing to the infrastructure. So it's a note for our messaging. All right. Is there anything that you would like additional on DCs ahead of deliberations? Oh, Jacinta.
I'll just note the team will be coming back with, you'll notice something in the financial considerations paper around development contributions that will come back, and that's around just suggesting a potential change in the timing of when things are billed. So you may recall a few OPRs ago, a question came and said, why have we got so many outstanding development contributions in our debtors? When we, in terms of how we bill, when we go through a subdivision process, we generally will bill it at the time. They get an assessment up front, we'll bill it at the time that they apply for a 224 or a title. That's all fine. In the building consent process, that's generally, they get invoiced at an earlier stage than near the end of the process. And money, but it's not quite through the building consent process yet. So we may come back through this paper with a proposal to adjust that timing. So they'll still receive their assessment up front, but they'll be billed closer to when they're applying for their code of compliance or they're doing their final inspection rather than earlier on. So just to flag that really, so it's not a surprise.
Jacinta, one of my nerdy colleagues went through all of the supporting information sitting behind the DC assumptions, and I think she sent in some stuff, but it prompted me to also have a look. And we obviously made some changes to the underlying assumptions in terms of the capital program around Three Waters, because that's what we've done. But there seem to be a number of other changes across other activities, so non-Three Waters activities as well, and that are no longer aligned to the current capital program. And there were a few questions that Puraheta had identified where it just so I guess the question is how confident are we about all of the lines sitting underneath all these assumptions, given that they were first put in 2021 in terms of the capital program that was implemented at that time. So in theory, we've just carried that over, except for the changes that we've made to Three Waters and some of the other small tweaks that we've made. Like, what's our confidence level in terms of the...
It's a good question. In terms of, I had looked myself at the table after Councillor Tukupo and I went through those questions. What happened basically was I checked in with the team, is there was an issue in terms of how the table was put together. So the activities, there was a misalignment of the activities and the projects. So from a modelling perspective, absolutely the model come out, they feed straight into the model, and that was checked extensively through the process with an external consultant helping us with that modelling. Where that's been transposed into the documentation that you see is there is a misalignment in terms of the activities and the projects. So apologies for that.
Did we find out what is Flaxhaven Development 2 something million 100% DC?
We've got an answer for that.
The answers are they haven't gone out yet. So yeah, it will come out as soon as part of those answers.
It's historic associated development and extension of the pot for growth. So it was a named term for a particular property adjacent to the pot.
I just had never heard the name before, and I thought, oh, what's that? It's new. And maybe I missed something, but okay.
Okay, moving on to fees and charges. So 261 people responded. The question, yes or no, whether they agreed with the proposed changes to fees and charges. So we have 115 agreed with the changes, 146 did not agree, and 157 of all the submitters did not respond on this question. So here we have it broken down by where people are in the district. We will also do the rural-urban split. There were a small number of comments on this, most of them related to dogs. Some people objecting to the increase, particularly in the current economic climate. And then there were a number of people who made suggestions about, say, responsible dog ownership schemes for teams of dogs as well. And so we'll be providing responses to you as part of this work on those issues. Great. Is there anything else that you would like in regards to fees and charges ahead of deliberations?
There's just some commentary around like stock and the costs around something around that recovery that. Yeah, it'd just be interesting just to cover that off because I think it was raised 2 or 3 times.
Yes, so we've got that noted as the other question to answer.
So as well with Foxton Transfer Station, you'll see in the financial considerations paper as well around fees, is with the change in the the emission trading scheme, sorry, left my mind for a minute, is the fees need to increase a bit further to make sure that they're covering that cost, so that will come back through that process as well. We have checked with legal in terms of is that reasonable to adjust that fee without a consultative process, and they said that it is. So just to flag that.
Sorry, just on fees and charges, Penny just reminded me that there were some building consent fees that are going up as well in the supporting documentation, and the percentages were quite significant compared to what we were doing with all the other fees and charges. And it came on the back of that discussion in the previous term about how we hadn't got the review and financing percentage split quite right. So it just surprised me that the fees were going up. I can send you an email about it if it's... Okay.
So our intent is to respond to it in the fees and charges report. I don't know if Blair wants to make a comment now or leave it.
Generally speaking, that was the percentage that was nominated in the change in the plan, but then there are a few other things that were altering around service fees from software providers and the like, that because they are fixed fees, there were some other additional sort of fixed charges coming in there, and not just the percentage increase, which made them skew a bit, Sam, in some cases.
Let me take a look at the responses regarding the Foxton Beach freeholding account. So here we've got the total responses, and then we've broken out the responses by Foxton and Foxton Beach. So really honing in on that local area here. Would just note that the meeting that was mentioned at the hearings with the local community by the Progressive Association is scheduled for tomorrow night, so we can feed any feedback from that into this as well.
It's just important to note as well that that's quite separate from the conversation around the Foxton Beach freeholding account and its approach for the future. So,
can I just clarify as well that the costs associated with managing this fund and staff time and all that kind of stuff, it's not deducted from the fund, right? It's funded by the general rate or across the district.
there is an overhead function that goes against, so there is an administrative charge that goes against the fund, but I would say we're starting, because there is more work being done in this space, to keep a track of it so that we've got a fair reflection of what the costs are.
So
Well, there's an amount of 80k per year. Does that 80k cover staff time at the moment? Probably not.
Okay, so just checking that there's nothing additional on that one.
Just on that one, so there was a lot of correspondence around the fact that people believe Foxton should be making that decision. Just somehow trying to capture some of those sort of, whether we capture the comments or all the numbers around that. I think there was quite a considerable number.
Yes, we can capture those comments as well.
So, in my unprofessional analysis, I could provide some feedback. Overall, what I picked up in the submissions is the yeses overall I saw was 160, so it's pretty close to what you've got there. 9 of those were Māori, and the no's were 97, 33 were Māori. But then when I looked to the Foxton residents I could identify within the submissions, there were only 25 in total Foxton residents that I picked up in those submissions. 9 of those were Māori, but 221 others outside of Foxton decided yes. So, just really confirming that the Foxton voice for me needs to be the loudest in this process, but the only way we're ever going to be able to determine that is if we're really precise in what we're asking for when we go out to consultation around something such as that. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. Thank you. So that's the key consultation topics that we went through. So we've identified a number of additional pieces of information that we'll provide. Just one final check if there was anything else that has come up as we've been progressing through the discussion.
I'd already sent a request in about some statistics about dog ownership and registrations and classes and additional dogs owned, just in terms of the viability of this secondary working dog charge. Was that discussed at all in your getting a legal opinion on things we could or couldn't do? What's the thoughts on requiring consultation for adding an additional class of dog? I thought it would be inclusive.
I doubt it would be a big issue. That analysis has been done. It's just being reviewed and then it'll be sent through.
And there was the comment from one of our submitters about rounding up and down some of the fees and charges to more logical numbers, i.e. those for pools. I was wondering if that had been kind of looked into and if there was going to be any commentary or updated schedule on some of those.
Yes, that would be included. Yep. Okay. So if we've captured everything, just a quick recap of our timeline. So next Wednesday is when the council agenda for deliberations goes public. 31st of May and 1st of June for deliberations. Shortly after that, on Tuesday the 6th of June, our final audit begins after the long King's Birthday weekend, and then 28th of June, council meeting for adoption of the long-term plan amendment and annual plan. Right, and that is everything that we had for you this evening.
Just one other thing about the ideas for cost saving. I just wondered if we could get not a full-on breakdown, but a sort of a breakdown of our governance budget. So this year it's 2.4 million, next year it's going up to 3.7. And is there something within our area we could cut or trim? So that's, understanding that. But then
pay cuts.
I did want to flag to everybody so that there's no surprises, and I'm coming back to the shared pathway thing, because there's other lines. If you go through this, there's lots of lines for various pathways. This one particularly for this annual plan is the Oho River Track, 250,000, and I just, in terms of, I'm just floating that. In terms of impact, well, I'll raise it in public anyway. A few users sporadically versus, I guess, the submission we received from Oho around many users daily. I just wondered if there's an appetite to prioritise one over the other. I'm not saying that the one that was suggested to us would cost 250,000, but if it was less than that, then it's another. And anyway, I'll be asking the question in public to see what how people want to position that.
Thanks. And that, just to clarify for everyone, that governance one will come out in the answers to those questions. The detail on what makes up the governance.
Sweet. Specific breakdown on catering costs and that. I think the data's been collated already. I'd like to see it.
Just before, just want to support Barry's comments around the shared pathways in particular, because it is a big line, and there's been a lot of talk over the years about the importance of shared pathways, and which I have supported absolutely. But at times where you're looking at, tight as things are, something's got to sort of probably give, and that could well be one of them. So anything that you can provide us around that's good. But also, I'd much rather go there than somewhere like dropping levels of service, which you'll be aware I'm not absolutely not in favour of. So yeah, I support those comments, bro.
$300 or something in there. It's not going to have that impact there.
We've heard the message loud and clear, Councillor Tukapoa, to present some options around shared pathways.
Nick, I just wanted to test. We have to start at 1 o'clock for deliberations. Is that set in stone?
No, because we do have time to publicly notify a different time. The reason that we initially were starting at 1 o'clock is because 1 o'clock is our normal council meeting start time, but we did have risk and assurance committee in the morning, but through a request from the chair and deputy chair, we've obviously moved risk and assurance out. So, I mean, my diary's free.
Well, that's why I wanted to test the appetite of the table to start at 11 o'clock or something like that, so that it's try to, I suppose, get it all done in one day. Yeah. I just think there's an opportunity to actually get more done in one day and remove the possibility of doing it. And I'd rather have the conversation all at once. Sometimes, spreading it over 2 days can be a bit problematic. But I just, would welcome your feedback on that.
Do you, I say this with respect, but do you really think you're going to get through the decision making in one day?
Yes. I'm committed to getting through.
You're confident as governors that you...
Support doing it with the early start, Bernie, but certainly not being pressed to force to be making a decision, to finish if we can't. So, yeah.
my wife supported too. I just wonder why it's not a 9 o'clock start. Honestly, if we're going to do it, start at 9, finish by morning tea. In that case, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think 10 o'clock.
Staff wouldn't be available until 10 a.m.
Yeah, I think 10 o'clock's the
Just means we've got a staff hui that morning that I'd be reluctant to move.
Yeah.
And then also just to, so we'll move the meeting to a 10 a.m. start, and we'll work on the basis that the meeting might have to go until Thursday, but council will, depend how your decision making process goes. Our intention is to present the reports in the order of which they were laid out in the consultation document. The only exception to that is the financial matters report will come last, and the reason for that is because as you go through the course of your decision making, you know, we kind of want to have the tally so that you can see where things are going up or down, and so you will have decided your rating system, but you won't have decided what your rate is. That will be the last decision that you make, and that's so that you don't make a decision on the rates and then decide to fund the OHO shared pathways and have to add extra money on or whatever it might be. I was winding you up there, Pity. I know, I said it to wind you up. I was trying to use it as an example. Or you might have deleted some footpath renewal money, which means that you might have just agreed on a rate and then you want your rate to be lower than that.
I have a dilemma. So, and Sam touched on it before. And could you go back to your very first slide, please, with your pie graph? Yeah, the rate review one. Respondents, how many? And I'm just going to say it now so then you can help me and then I don't have to struggle in the deliberations. So we put out a letter and it says to everybody or ratepayers, you currently pay X. Your revaluation means you're going to pay X. Under the proposed, under the proposal, option 2, you're going to be paying X. So they see what they pay now and what the proposal is. It doesn't say a sentence that says, should status quo remain, you pay X, which is effectively land value option 1. Now, I tested it to see, okay, for someone in Livin, average Joe, does that mean that, we know how many go up, but this example meant it went up by just over $200 more than what they saw in their letter. And so they actually looked at that letter and thought, I'm alright, it's not a huge increase, it's a bit of an increase. So I don't feel compelled to have to jump up and tell council, gnarly, I'm going to be okay and just accept it, don't submit, don't engage. But then they're going to get their invoice, potentially, that says this much more, and they're going to be like, but my letter said this. How many phone calls might we get as a result, because it's not what they expected or because we forgot to say, and let's own it, we forgot to say status quo means X, because we might have got a bit more responses from another part of the community that thought they were okay. That's my struggle at the moment, so help me please with your debates.
It's my understanding that it went out based on our preferred option.
Yeah.
Following having to do a preferred
I suppose it's up to the staff to
Yeah.
clarify that.
Take it up with order.
No, Penny's right. We've got to own it. When I say we've got to own it, we collectively have to own it because we all signed into the engagement process. Certainly on reflection, and we thought we were being helpful by simplifying it because of how complex it is. But on reflection, we should have said,
that one example I said,
Yeah.
the $200. We had a guy come in here, slam his baked beans over there, tell us, oh my God, and I was feeling really sorry for him. Then I look up his address and he's only going up $200. And I think, oh God, if he's upset about $200 and this other general one is going up $200, oh my God, like.
Yeah, so on reflection, the letter should have said, or in the future, if we were ever to go through this process again, it would say, this is what you currently pay, this is what the revaluation says you'd currently pay. We're thinking about these three options. Our preferred option is this, in which you'd pay this. However, if we went for this option, which is the status quo, you'd pay this, and if we went for the other option, you'd pay this. And so, one of the conversations I've had with the team is, how could we give some reassurance to, like, what does effective comms look like depending on what the decision of council is, so that we preempt some of that stuff. So for example, if council decided to stay at status quo land value, how do we try and get ahead of those phone calls, or how do we manage the conversations where people are like, I thought I was going to decrease and I'm now getting an increase. And I think that your perspective, Pity, around maybe we haven't heard from those people because they haven't thought that they needed to be heard. That is a perspective. Just like you'll be considering the other perspectives around, well, the people who really felt impacted because of what they read in the letter and therefore wanted to be heard.
As in the comms, simply around that we've undertaken a process and we've responded to those that have participated in the process.
It's just the policy.
I know what you're saying. I'd agree with what Jonathan's saying though too, in that we went through a process. The submissions information we received was A, so we've made a decision. Or, for example, we've made a decision on this, and it might be the dog registrations or whatever. But it's a tough one. But that's one side of the argument, I suppose.
Yeah, I realise that.
Yeah, I suppose there's an element of, are we going to send out a subsequent letter that says these are your new rates, it's all confirmed? And
That's effectively what we do when we send out the assessment in July.
Yeah, are we going to do that separate to here's your bill? No.
Because we need the struck rate.
Yeah.
We need the rates to be struck in order for that to have absolute accuracy.
Yeah.
So,
it's just conflicting when, people who didn't engage in the process have received a letter and then they're going to receive a subsequent letter. Well, no, they're going to receive a bill that's $300 higher than their letter.
They would receive a letter accompanying that to say absolutely that.
Yeah.
But I guess I just want to go back and say, regardless of what decision you make, there's 18,000 ratepayers in the district. 200. This is the number that actively submitted, and that's why, regardless of what you do, we want to make sure that you've got the analysis, so you understand. And there's the active participation in the process, but you understand the impacts on the whole community when you're making your decision. So that's why, as part of that analysis, I was really keen to make sure that you felt like you had everything you needed to make that balanced decision. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. And, when I checked the number of addresses that were on that voted for, preferred the option one, and when you actually look at their rates, their rates would have actually gone down under option two. So I don't know whether they fully understood, in fact, what they were, the letter that they got, because they obviously misinterpreted what the options were. But yeah, look, I completely agree with Jacinda on that. We've got, it's all relative.
I'm just going to say that you do have to make a decision.
Yes.
And I would say what those decisions about let's wait for next year, I think I'd be on the bike going that way if you decided to do it again next year, because I don't think that decision, I'm joking, but at the same time, down the shared pathway, because the decision, it'd be very unlikely that you would get a different outcome if you were to wait. So
That's what I spoke to last week too, to councillors, that you don't make your base your decision just on what you've heard from your submitters, because you got to go far deeper than that. There's a whole lot of and for us, for those extended list of, for example, properties under each option, what the results that might look like. Although we could do that ourselves, because you're only hearing from a small amount of people in the district that are going to be affected one way or the other. So do your due diligence.
sorry, what?
I was just going to say, I think one of my fears is, and I've heard it raised a couple of times, and I think I raised it last time as well, there's the impact on our Māori blocks, and that's not clear to me still, what that impact is. And I mean, Peter Everton laid it out pretty heavy in terms of, the impact on not only him, but impact on those blocks. And, we can tell just by the data, very few Māori actually gave feedback around the rating stuff. Probably because they just don't understand it well enough. And so my fear is that whatever decision we make as a council, we actually still have not reflectively identified what that impact is on a very large component of landowners in this district. And so, I don't know if I'm asking the right thing, but it's hard to make a decision when I don't know how they're impacted.
It's a good question, and so as part of we will be bringing back, in terms of what is identified as Māori freehold land, we will bring that back as part of this as a separate analysis in terms of option 1, 2, and 3 for sure.
Just around the use of Māori land, that's again going to change the outcome of what the ratings looks like for those blocks, determining on how their land's been used.
Is your spreadsheet still available for us? Because I found that really helpful when we were going through those workshops.
Yeah, I'll send you it, because there was a draft version when we were in the earlier stages. The one that links to the letters is in your portal as well, but I'll send out a link tonight just so I make sure you're using the right one. But yeah, it's definitely there. Yeah. Great, thanks everybody.